is you can invest in a different kind of piece of equipment which can improve your business. Save on waste. Make sure that you've got everything optimized so that you're not throwing things away that are still useful to you. And as a kind of point of proof of all of this concept, I'd like you, if you're willing to stay to the end of this talk, I can let you find out how you can earn £100 credit to spend with Murphy and Son, and we'll go through all that at the end. Thank you very much.
All right, so the key to sustainability without CAPEX is measuring. So you can't reduce anything that you don't measure. So as brewers, we need to get quite a lot better, I think, at measuring. You can do that throughout the process. It can be as cheap or as expensive as you can. Of course, things like flow meters are great on brew houses, but I know a lot of people are using sort of measuring sticks and anything. It's all about making sure that you do measure and it's consistent. The consistency is key. And finally, recording it onto some form of, let's say, spreadsheet, so Excel or Google, so you can actually use that data. I know that brewers, we often use paper, and it feels like kind of homely almost. But paper isn't any use anymore, and everything needs to be recorded digitally. Then you can use that data over the course of the next month and year to really drive down on your efficiency and your improvements. So measuring is super key. I think we've got a lot of animation that's going to click through here, basically just going through all the types. So I'm going to do a quick sort of audience participation. So anyone here who is a brewer or has worked in a brewery before, put your hands up if you measure brewhouse efficiency on every single batch. That's good. Who measures the amount of water they use compared to the packaged beer that they make? That's good. And I'm going to say, let's say electricity and gas. Maybe a few. And then what about CO2 as well? So the amount of CO2 they use compared to the amount of hectoliters they use. Correct me, man, I know that. So if I was to ask a question to you all and be, who here wants to save costs in their brewery, I would imagine everyone's hand would go up. And this is the fascinating thing. We need to get a lot better at measuring as a group of people. And I think brewhouse efficiency, and that's what we're going to talk about quite a lot today, is the brewhouse savings that you can make. The brewhouse efficiency is the #1 metric of a brewhouse. It tells you how well you've converted and how well you've kept. So the calculation is really simple. I think most of us probably know it, but I'm just going to put it up there. And it's actually really easy to calculate as well. So you need a malt COA, which I think was supplied here by Simpsons as a nice idea of what a malt COA in specs can look like. Then you need your gravity and your volume of your wort. And it's important for brewhouse efficiency that this is the fermenter, not anywhere else. The reason being that it incorporates all of your losses throughout all of your process. However, maybe one that is less often done is the mash lauter efficiency. This is key. So the mash lauter efficiency is you take the same calculation but apply your pre-boil volume and your pre-boil density. And what this will do is tell you how well you've converted your sugar or your starch. So it tells you how much you've done. And then the difference between that and your brewhouse efficiency, you can see as your losses. And it's a really good way of isolating where your sort of issues lie. And it's key. So if you're going to do this, you should also be doing this. But when we talk and we report on brewhouse efficiency, it's always the fermenter volume. I know a lot of people find it, sometimes it's easier to use the bigger number. It makes yourself feel a bit better, but it's just not correct.
I think it's really good as well because when you look at your C of A, don't forget to try and stay on top of like the C of A's that are coming in next season's malt. Like, try and get ahead of it and what might be coming up.
Absolutely. Okay, so, let me see the next slide. All right, so you've now measured. The key now is to benchmark. There's two types of benchmarking. There's internal benchmarking and external benchmarking. So internal benchmarking is taking, let's say, your brewhouse efficiency over the course of 1 month and comparing it to the next month. Really simple, but also really important. You can start to see maybe fluctuations in ways where improvements can be made and why potentially 1 month or 1 week or even one brewer is better or more efficient than another. So internal benchmarking is great. But one thing I noticed when I was working in breweries before was there was no real external benchmarking. So, okay, great. I've got a water ratio of 10. So I've got 10 litres to make a litre, and I improve it and I get it down to 9. I pat myself on the back and I go, great year, I've done a good job. But actually, that 9 is 3 or 4 litres per litre greater than what everyone else is doing. So I basically made a free benchmarking tool for any brewery in the world to use. And you put your key metrics in, which are the ones we discussed earlier, so brewhouse efficiency, water intensity, gas, electric, and CO2. And it will compare you against, at the moment, 65 other breweries, which is the amount of people who have used it so far, and compare you to a similar size. So again, gives you an idea of if you're actually performing well or not. What I find fascinating is I've got breweries, the variance that I see is absolutely wild. I'll have a brewery down at 2.5 litre to litre ratio and breweries at 20. And I think this really opened my eyes to, again, what maybe a sustainability in our industry. There is no standards. There is no way, we don't know what is good and what is bad. So that's what I'm trying to establish with Brew Resourceful. Okay, so now we're going into a bit more of practical help of how to actually sort of better your sustainability without the need of CAPEX. So we're going to be talking entirely about process changes and maybe process aids as well that will help you on your journey. A nice easy win, if you've got a mill, is your mill settings. I know a lot of people who have mills, but do they have the SIB analysis to go with it, or the SIF to go with it? If you can do that every 6 months to a year, you can get a nice easy 2% efficiency gain comfortably with that. And also rollers drift over time. So what might be right 1 month might not be right in the next 6 months and 12 months. So it's really key you get on top of that. If you have a mill, you should have some sieves as well. The next one is doughing in, or the sort of mashing in procedure. This is going to sound very simple to a lot of people, but ultimately there'll be some people in here who think that does apply to me. And if you've got dough balls in your mash, or when you're mashing in, if you're seeing those balls clump or the mold clump together, that's inefficient. And you can break them, you might try to break them up, or you might have a mash mixer and you're relying on that, but you need to make sure your doughing in procedure is hydrating all of the mold correctly. I've actually seen really great examples of people who don't even have mash hydrators. So again, it's just, don't think that your kit is sort of impeding you. Your process is going to dictate a lot of this. A good one, liquid to grist ratio. I've read a bunch of really great articles in the MBAA, in the Brewers Association, about how reducing your liquid to grist ratio will increase your efficiency. And that is definitely true for the sort of higher Plato beers, so anything above 15 Plato, definitely true. Doesn't actually always translate down to the sort of smaller brew. And if you're using an isothermal mash tun, it should really be between sort of 2.6 and realistically 2.8 on your liquid to grist for efficiency. And if you've got a separate mash louder tun, that does increase slightly to sort of 2.8 to 3.5 maybe. I wouldn't go much higher than that. It's really important you get that right. And I think Steph's going to talk about in the next slide is like why liquid to grist ratio is also important for your enzymes.
Yep, okay, thanks Chris. So as we're saying, this is all in the mash. So let's think about your ideal mash tun. It's built perfectly, rehydrates your mash just as you want it to. It's stirred. You can change the temperature to within an nth of a degree. And you can work your way up through this graph that I'm sure you've all seen. It's from John Palmer's How to Brew. So you're going to hit perfectly all of the temperatures and pHs that are perfect for those enzymes which exist in the malt. So as we know, that isn't actually what happens. And in fact, maybe you've got a mash tun, it doesn't have a stirrer, and you're unable to start at those lower temperatures and work your way up through all of those enzyme rests. So in which case, you're now thinking, well, I'm going to have to make a compromise. And the compromise is always going to be based around that conversion of sugars, because the aim is to convert sugars into ethanol. If you're not doing that, you're not making beer. So you might have to bypass these kind of glucanase, protease rests, and jump straight to the beta and alpha amylases, which are going to break down those long chain sugars and turn them into fermentable sugars. But even that, you can see there's quite a difference between where beta amylase and alpha amylase lie. So, we call this the MASH target, where you've got an overlap between some alpha-lase action, some of that beta amylase action. You're trying to get it in the middle of the pH that they both like, so you can try and hit that. But even then, if you think when you're mashing in, what time of year are you doing it? Where do you store your malt? Is it winter? Is your malt freezing cold? Have you warmed your mash tun up? When you're mashing in, how long does it take? Are you getting sort of cool patches? Have you been keeping an eye on the pH? Has the pH stayed constant throughout the whole thing? So as you can imagine, this mash tun is not that homogeneous environment that we were really hoping for, that would give us this perfect enzymatic reaction. And the graph on the right here, you can see that the bit in the middle represents that MASH target. So you're aiming for around 67 degrees C, where you get that nice overlap between beta amylase and alpha amylase. But you can also see that actually within a few degrees temperature change, you're changing the relationship between those enzymes quite significantly. So, if you drop in temperature by a couple of degrees, you're going to lose that alpha amylase action, and if you increase too high, then you're going to lose that beta amylase action. So you're already compromising by missing out on the glucanase and protease rests, but within that, because you can't make the situation perfect, within that structure, you're compromising, within pockets of space within that mash tun as well. So what you can do to get around this is you can add in those enzymes kind of extracellularly, as it were. So just as an example, we've got a blend of the three enzymes, beta-glucanase, a protease and an alpha amylase. And what this does, it means that you don't have to compromise on those temperature and pH ranges anymore. You can add it in based on the amount of malt that you're adding, and what you can then consider around the kind of craft side of it is where you want that beta amylase action to be, and aim just for that temperature instead. So you've still got control over the situation, but you can add this enzyme in, and it's going to make sure that you're efficiently converting everything that exists in that malt into your final product. Because ultimately, you pay a lot of money for malt, and if you haven't converted it all, and you send your spent grain off to a farmer, then you're just feeding those cows some really good quality malt. So yeah, I'm sure the cows appreciate it, but that's an expensive way to go around it. And the other thing is, as Chris was saying before, you have to consider your liquid to grist ratio when you're mashing in. But in theory, the more water that's available, the more efficient that enzyme conversion should be. Those enzymes don't like to work under that high osmotic pressure, but obviously that's not how you can brew. You don't make really weak beers all the time. So again, this gets around that whole situation. You can add in these really strong enzymes, make sure that you can choose exactly what ratio you need, and get that full conversion.
So yeah, I actually did some sustainability trials with London Brewing Company, and we trialed a bunch of these process aids to sort of see what their effect is also on brewhouse efficiency. And so Triazine, the one in the blue tub over there, was actually really good for us. It actually increased everything else being equal, malt being equal, processes being as equal as possible. We actually increased the efficiency by 3%, which is, if you take 3% of your malt costs, it's quite a significant amount, and it comfortably pays for the enzyme itself. It's kind of like becoming quite a modern approach to brewing, I think, where we're sort of relying on science to sort of emulate some of the things we were doing to sort of help increase the efficiency. Okay, so moving on to the big one. This is really where brewhouse efficiency is won and lost. And that's in the lautering and the sparging. So we all know what lautering and sparging is. What I will say is I could probably do an entire presentation just on this, going through the different types of equipment and how to operate those. The thing is we don't have loads of that time, so what I'm going to do is give you some pretty much hard and fast rules that I know apply across all types of loutering and sparging. So I've actually worked on isothermal mash tuns, separate mash lautertons, mash filters, and strain master as well, which I think was the only one left in existence. So I've got a good idea of what the rules of these are and what can apply to everything. Some of them are going to be, well, most of them are actually very basic. I've probably said this before and I'll say it again. This isn't overly complex, but I guarantee there'll be people in here who will look at their process and think, that does actually probably apply to me. So the rules they should all follow. The one, you can't really talk about loutering without mentioning Darcy's Law. It's a really fascinating way of approaching how work flows through a permeable bed. The one thing, it was created with sand, not with grain, and it's been adapted for the loutering. It's really useful to understand Darcy's Law, so you can understand how the work and why the work is flowing. And you can actually adapt some of these, especially the bottom two, to sort of increase your efficiency. But what I will say is don't live and die by it. It is useful, and I know a lot of textbooks love to talk about it, but it's good, but it's not going to get you loads of brewhouse efficiency, but you can't really talk about loutering without it. So the rules to follow are, there we go, protect your first runnings. It's really common. So you've done all the hard work, you've created your really strong first work. And I think people, especially with isothermal mash tuns, often look at their sort of sparging loutering as a singular process. So they'll set the flow rate to X on the way out, and maybe they're adjusting slightly, and then they'll set the sparge and they'll leave it. And this is a suboptimal way of approaching mashing and loutering, because you need to protect, especially at the start, you need to protect your first runnings. So what that means though is you need to draw off the first runnings slower than you will be doing at the end. So you start nice and slow. That also means you have to slow down your sparge as well. So what you don't want to do is over dilute or dilute those first runnings too much. So you're trying to match the bed and level it down with your sort of sparging. That will also help you prevent channeling. If you've got rakes and you're using them in your lauter tun, channeling is a lot less of a concern to some extent than it is in an isothermal. And you've got to be really cautious at the start of not turning the pump on too quick and sort of compressing that bed really tight. This is going to force water through the path of least resistance, and that's just going to be very inefficient to create those channels. So you need to protect your first work and just go nice and slow at the start. It's also really important. This is the one I probably see, next to the two I see most commonly, is last runnings. So your last runnings target should be 1.006 SG with a plus or minus of 1. So I know there's a lot of concern with tannins and polyphenols and lipids that you draw through. I can say from my experience, working on a lot of sensory panels and with a lot of good lab equipment, you can comfortably go down to 105 with no impact on this. I do, of course, urge you not just to listen to some guy at a conference and then go and start changing everything. You should be tasting this yourself, but I almost guarantee that you will. So you don't want to go close below 1.05, so what you do is you just set your target one higher, and then when you hit that, you can stop. You shouldn't want to, like 8, like 2 Plato, 8 or even 10 SG is too high, and it's just inefficient. You think about it, it's literally, this is good quality work that you're just putting down the drain. And then the last one is probably the most common, that's the over-sparging. So, under-sparging, I appreciate the fear of under-sparging, because you don't want to not hit your kettle volume. But over-sparging is kind of just as bad. Try and think sparging instead of the word sparging, use the word dilution. So if you're putting an extra 200-300 litres and that's going down the drain at the end, that's over-diluting your work by 200-300 litres, which will decrease your final runnings and decrease your kettle volume, or kettle density. So really key ways of not basically becoming efficient in your brewery by just following these simple rules. And these apply to everything. As I said, sustainability doesn't have to be complex and often isn't, and it's just measuring what you're currently doing and improving the processes around them.
Okay. So now you're graduate level mathematicians in your lecturing process. I'm going to just give you a real quick win that you can do in the kettle. We've got a product, carrageenan, so you can get this in a few different formats like protoflop or kettle clear. But basically, it's a carrageenan. It's derived from seaweed. We get it from the finest sources that you can get in the Philippines. So it's a natural product. It's a negatively charged carrageenan, and it binds to those positively charged proteins in the cold break. And as it forms, you get these larger particulates, which is able to sediment out, which is Stokes' law, if you want another bit of maths. And then these fall to the bottom of the vessel and help to clarify your beer. So you've got a little picture here, very simple, the difference of using it and not using it. You can see it's quite striking. If you're also a fan of a graph, and who isn't? If you see it also, it then improves the filtration rate later on. So if you're using something like protoflop, you can see with protoflop, that this was used in 15 parts per million, it vastly increases the filtration rate compared to not using it. So you can see when you use it initially, visually, it's working straight away, but it's still, what you're doing at the beginning of the process is still improving those effects at the end of the process as well. So those proteins hang around, interact with other polyphenols, and cause you issues later on. So yeah, it really helps with downstream processing as well.
Absolutely. Oh yeah, it's me, yeah, we've got work losses. So another key part, we've talked about mash laughter efficiency and how to sort of rules and easy ways to basically become efficient. You've then got to protect it. So as I said, the difference between the brew house efficiency and mash laughter efficiency can be considered as your losses. So how do you protect your work losses? You need to first have an approach where every single half a litre matters. So you've already done the hard work, as I said, of creating the work. It should not be going down the drain. One sort of company or brewery I worked with over the last year, they had an external calandria, and it was not being, they basically had wort in it at the end of the boil, and they weren't pushing it out. And I think, because everyone kind of knows that's not great, but they kind of thought, well, it's just 80 litres in what was a much larger brew. But if you times that by the amount that they brewed a year, they were actually brewing 2.5 brews down the drain. So if you were to then frame that in a different angle and be like, would you like to brew the first 2.5 brews of your year to the drain? The answer is going to be a clear and obvious no. And that's where work losses really creep up on you. And I implore that you can use this, of course, across kind of anything, a dripping tap, a dripping hose. You basically time that what it looks like a very small volume by the amount that you brew in a year, or the amount of time that leak is happening, and the numbers start to look pretty scary and pretty significant. So work losses are really, really important. I've got a couple of examples of, we're going to be talking about whirlpooling next, and I've got a couple of examples of what looks like good and bad whirlpooling. I will say that for a lot of breweries, I appreciate they probably have a integrated or like 1 and 2 sort of kettle whirlpool, and I appreciate why that is, because it saves a lot of capital at the start. It also saves a lot of floor space, but the problem is they're not efficient whirlpoolers. So you can start to see quite high losses. As you know, there's always a cost somewhere, and it's cheaper up front, it costs you more down the line. That being said, you should be able to achieve between 1 and 3% losses with your whirlpooling. What I've got up here is an example of what looks like good and bad. So you've got the top here is an ideal chug cake. So this is actually, you can probably tell, is in a whirlpool, separate whirlpool vessel. But you'll see the difference. So you see the one at the top is nice and compact and dry. That means that you've been very efficient with your whirlpooling. You can actually see the clearer wort on the side. Similar volume left, and you can see the breakup of the particle, and you can already see where the chug is entering, and that's the end. So this is the difference between a 1% loss and a 6% loss. And it's the same at the end of at the end of cast as well. You see that one's nice and tight, and this one's spread out all over. Again, the difference between a 1 and a 6% loss. Now, even if you do have a kettle whirlpool combined, you can still look at this and give yourself an idea of what looks like good and what looks like bad. I will say there are some rules that you all should follow again. So you need to have a velocity going into your whirlpool of at least 1.5 meters per second. If it's not that, you will not achieve an effective whirlpool. A lot of them are designed so that it should be, but it's also a really key one. It can be a nice, easy one to check. I mean, the fact that the whirlpool is designed correctly often really helps, but you can also make a lot of changes. I think one thing I always try and say to people is quantify what your current equipment is getting you, and then use the change or the increase to justify a sort of a modification to your kit. So try to look at it as not, I think quite common we go, well, this is just the kit that I have and this is how it is, but everything can be changed and modified, and you should use your losses as sort of a justification for an ROI on that. There's also some really great products out now where you don't actually have to put the hops into the whirlpool. So if you don't have an effective kettle whirlpool, one way of reducing it is basically by not putting actual hops in there and replacing it with the liquid extracts that companies change. Again, I appreciate there's always sensory concerns with this, and you should be following those completely. But what I'm trying to do is think about things that are different to what you're currently doing, and don't just accept that your kit is not working or is not being efficient.
Okay, so let's do a little bit more audience participation. You've been sat down still too long. Who here is like sending their water off and getting it analysed and thinking about water chemistry for their beers? Anyone? Nice, I like it, thank you. So you're already thinking about how important water chemistry is when it comes to making your beers. So yeah, you can get your liquor analysis done. You can monitor trends. You know, where in the country are you? Does the water company flip you between one reservoir or another? Do you live somewhere where if there is a lot of heavy rainfall, that it changes the profile of your water chemistry? You know, stay on top of that. Drink your water every morning, and you'll get a really good idea about it. So we all know that water chemistry for your beer is important, but water in your brewery is important as well. So don't forget that. So yes, it's less obvious, but it's used everywhere. Everything from obviously cleaning, the fact that people, you've got toilets and people are washing their hands. Don't forget that water is coming into your premises and leaving one way or another. I'm sure it's not working. So how can you do this? How can you benchmark that? Regularly check your meters, check for leaks. If you are measuring this and you're doing everything the same, and for some reason your water usage is jumping up, it's likely that it's leaking out from somewhere. Think about your CIP and your rinse optimizations. Again, if you're somewhere in a hard water area, you might need to think about using a sequestrant in your cleaning chemicals to make sure you're getting the perfect cleaning action. Rinse water on packaging lines, another place where you might use more than you need just to make sure everything gets done. But the thing is, like, you know about paying for water coming into your venue, but don't forget that you're also paying for it to leave. So you pay for your wastewater. So you need to think, at every drip that comes out of a tap that you don't want to go somewhere, you're paying for. So, as we say, just measure it, see what's going on, and see if there's ways that you can reduce it, and make sure that you've got equipment that's being maintained and that nothing's leaking anywhere.
Yeah, so just to jump in on that, so about 40% of your water usage is on CIP and rinses, and not often do you see them fully optimized. Again, we should probably do a whole slideshow on just how to optimize your CIP routine. On my podcast, I am definitely going to plug that. It's pretty shameless, but I don't mind. I did an episode with Belinda, who I can see over there, who is an expert, and we went through and we sort of go an hour and 10 minutes, an hour and 20 minutes on how to optimize your CIP process. So, and you can reduce, I've seen breweries 20, 30, 40% of their water to go down by just optimizing this. Like a nice key tip, are you continuous rinsing or burst rinsing? You should never be a continuous rinsing your caustic out with water. It should always be burst. And that, again, can save you several percentages of your water usage. And just to echo Steph's point, it's really important that you consider the total cost of water. I think when you look at your water bill or you break it down per hectolitre, it looks pretty cheap, and it is compared to electricity and compared to gas. But it actually over doubles when you consider you also pay for it to go down the drain as well. And that can really help you understand or appreciate maybe the ROI on any projects and worthwhile investing. I'll also say for the small brewer, this is my complete prediction. It's based off not loads of facts, I guess, but I think that we will be, as an industry, we are going to be challenged predominantly on water before we are on anything else. I think the small brewer is always probably going to be flying under the radar of government sustainability, like sort of the width. But water is something that's becoming a scarce resource, quite widely talked about, and our waterways are near a pretty disastrous state. And we are quite heavy water users. We're not massive electricity and gas users compared to a lot of industries, but we are quite heavy on the water. And again, I go back, there's breweries using 2 litres and there's breweries using 20 litres. And those breweries, I think, are going to come under the quickest amount of pressure. There's already counties where water is so scarce that you can't actually build a new business and take excess water, or any extra water out of the waterways. It's a real possibility, and then of course you factor in droughts and the more extreme weather. I think this is going to be the key one that we'll end up talking about in the next 5 years conferences, even more so than electricity and gas.
Okay, so our rebrand of Antifoam is so new that it even outdates this slide. So I only made it a few days ago, but we've rebranded Antifoam Refoam, and for the reasons that when we talk about Antifoam, some people that I talk to, they think, well, no, I want foam on top of my beer. I don't want to get rid of it. But using Antifoam during the process means that you get to keep that foam in the place where you want it until you need it later. So that's kind of the thought process behind it. So you can use it in the kettle, the fermenter, and even in your CIP system, just to make sure that you haven't got foam flowing out in places where you don't want it. It's a better foam, as I say, you get better foam in your beer. So even though, as it's called, it's Antifoam, now we're calling it Refoam, it's a pro foam product, so you get better foam on your pint glass when you pour it. It also improves hop utilisation. It improves your vessel utilisation. Sorry, I think the clicker's not. And you get less mess, obviously, if you use during the CIP to ensure detergents are low foaming whilst cleaning. So the reason that all those things happen is if you imagine what's going on in your fermenter when all that foam builds up. Perhaps it's built up so much that it's even coming out your CIP blow-off tube. Is that foam has got loads of goodness in it. It's obviously got those foam-positive proteins, it's got alpha acids from the hops that you've added, it's got active yeast in there, so you're losing that out of your fermentation, and you wanted to keep that in solution. So by using something like an Antifoam, you keep that all down, and all of those things then carry on through to the end of the fermentation. The other upshot from that is that you increase your vessel capacity because you don't have to consider that foam that's building up inside your fermenter. But then also later on when you need to clean it, you haven't got foam that's stuck in all the kind of nooks and crannies at the top, like behind your spray ball. So it also means that you can put less energy into cleaning your vessel. So it's an all-round good thing to save with.
Yeah, and on the subject of sustainability without CAPEX, I think we often look to buy new fermenters to increase capacity, but we don't often look at what we currently have and how we can maximise the current capacity. So, increasing your capacity by 5-10% on each tank will significantly increase the capacity of your brewery, and therefore negate the fact you have to buy a new tank.
And on that note, how many of you have had beer stuck in a tank much longer than you were hoping for? You've got your sales guys down your throat because it was supposed to already be on a bar, but it's sat in a tank waiting for a diacetyl rest. So what you can do is use an enzyme like ALDC it completely bypasses that reaction. So you start with your precursor, alpha-acetolactate. Usually it has to go through this very slow reaction. Diacetyl is formed, it's taken back up again, and then turned into that product acetoin. And what ALDC does is it bypasses that reaction, so you don't have to go through the diacetyl step, so it just never exists. We did a lot of research on this at Murphy's, and as well as looking at diacetyl build-up throughout the fermentation, we're also looking at what goes on during the dry hop. So you can see here that we've got a situation where we've got a control which we dry hopped, then we've got an addition of ALDC in the original control, and an extra ALDC addition with a dry hop. And you can see in that dark grey bar on the chart that you get a very slow reduction in that VDK, so the diacetyl, before it goes below that level of detection. So it's all the way up to 208 hours before that's down and you can't taste it anymore. Whereas if you'd have added it at the beginning of fermentation at 88 hours, it wouldn't be there. So that can make a huge difference to your brewery. If you're a brewery that does a dry hop, what happens is there's enzymes in those hops which can release further sugars. So you get a little bit of fermentation kind of re-kicking off. A little bit of diacetyl gets re-pumped out, so you can see that here in the grey bar which is striped. So a dry hop was added at 88 hours. This increased the amount of VDK levels at 112 hours, and again that takes a long time to go back down again, so you're back to 208 hours before that goes down below the level of detection. If you added an addition of this enzyme, ALDC, in with your dry hop, you get that fresh action of the enzyme against the precursor, which was obviously available, and that keeps it down below the level of detection for the entire course of the fermentation and while you're waiting for the dry hop. So you can see that it saves a hell of a lot of time in your vessel residency, which means you can turn those tanks over quicker, and it's like having an extra tank in your brewery. You can get it empty, get that beer out, get it sold, and make another one.
Yeah, we had, I mean, my experience of hop creep was pretty gnarly when I was running a brewery. We were seeing dry hop creep on nearly most of our beers, and we had quite strict production schedule, and it was causing chaos. I mean, instead of having a 16 days residency time, we were seeing anywhere between 18 and 24 trying to get the dry hop creep to pass its VDK, and it was a mess, to be honest. So we started using ALDC a lot, just to try and get repeatability on our tank residency time, and we added it in with the dry hop. So it kind of depends on your process and what you do. I think Murphy's would probably recommend it on both on wort inception and on dry hop. But we added it in like sort of a few grams a hectoliter on in dry hop, and it helped the problem. But I mean, dry hop creep is tough. We ended up solving. It took about 2 years. We ended up solving the dry hop creep as a issue and not having to use it. But it's a really good product to make sure that you are hitting your residency times. Again, just to go back to what we said before, what Steph just said, that is kind of sustainability as well. I mean, you're looking at, again, we're talking about not purchasing a tank here, which has a pretty significant environmental impact and economic impact on your brewery. So just trying to maximize what you currently have. It's a really good tool, and just be a bit, maybe look at it and just be a bit smarter with your residency times and a bit more strict on how repeatable they are.
Okay, so another nice one is using an enzyme like Brewer's Clarity, and again, another reason why my talk is already a little bit outdated. We have another enzyme available now called dehaze, so it does the same job. I would like to point out at this point that if you would like a free sample of the refoam or dehaze, then make your way over to the Murphy stand where you can collect one. So this is really good for energy saving, it's good for stabilisation, and as a bonus you can also make gluten-free beer if that's something that you want in your portfolio as well. So what happens with this enzyme is you can see on the left here that you've got these gluten-forming these gluten units which can form haze. And the reason that they do that is that if polyphenols are also in the mix, they bind with the proline sites and they almost make like a scaffold-looking structure. And this is that haze that sort of builds up when you chill the beer. What the enzyme does is it cleaves the proline sites, so those molecules are still around but in a cut-up form. So that's why it doesn't change what your beer is like, how it tastes, the mouthfeel, or anything like that. But those gluten molecules have now been reduced, so chill haze can't form. And as a bonus, that means that gluten isn't there either. So if you were hoping to make a gluten-free beer, then you can label it as gluten-free if you do the tests. So we've got a graph of, again, some research that we did on beers where we use different dosage rates in a beer. So you can see if you don't add it, you've got a very high amount of gluten, and you also have a high amount of this haze that can react with tannic acid. So we know it's a chill haze. If you start adding 3 grams per litre, 4, 6 in this graph, you can see both of those things reduce. So you reduce the haze and you also reduce the gluten. So it's a nice thing that you can have one product in it and it's got a double win.
Yeah, so if you're making gluten-free beer, it shouldn't be chilled down to as much as the rest of your beer, because that's the idea of it. So that's another great energy saving for electricity as well, because you can not store your beer at -1 or 0, and you can hold it at 2, 3 instead. It's nice good.
Yep, okay, so as I promised at the beginning, we wanted to let you know how you could look at your brewery as it is now and save yourself a load of money. So look at the processes that you're doing, measure what you're doing, and from that think about what can I change? How can I make these, well, it seems like small wins, but if you're doing it on a daily basis, they might turn out to be big wins over the course of a year. So the message to take away is measure, test, and measure again. Optimize every part of the process, make sure that you're doing everything perfectly, you're using the right amount of product so there's no wastage, and you're maximizing everything that you're putting in. Of course, you can ask us any questions about how we can help you save. And as I said, if you would like to earn a £100 credit to spend at Murphy's, then all you need to do is book in a technical visit, and me and Chris will come and visit you and help you to take those measurements and see what we can do for you. And then based on a £400 spend, we can knock £100 off that as well. So if you quote BeerX Sustainability, get in touch and we can sort that out for you. So any way you want to get in touch, we'll have our emails up in a minute, LinkedIn, send me a carrier pigeon, however, and yeah, we'll come over and we'll save you some money.
Yeah, and I think just to summarize, I can't emphasize it enough how simple sustainability can be. I appreciate that CAPEX is limited. I always implore people, before you spend your money on anything, please do measure what you're actually currently doing and then benchmark it both internally and externally so you know what is good and what needs improving. And then you can start this whole reduction process. If anyone has any questions, I think we run out of time for questions maybe now, but I'm going to be around for the rest of the event. So please you can find me, ask me any questions you like on sustainability. I'm sure Steph as well. Super pumped to answer any of them. So yeah, the next slide's got a QR code. I think it takes you to my website or my LinkedIn. But yeah, if anyone wants the slides as well, happy to email them over. It's no problem. So
Yeah.
Thank you very much for coming.
Thank you. Do we have time for any quick questions? 5 minutes of question times apparently, if anyone's got a question. Covered it.
Hi, you had a slide earlier about CIP optimizations. I think there's a few different ways for smaller breweries to look at when they're gotten the caustic out of their system. We've used pH meters, and our brewery, we try to get the pH down to below 8.1. but that's a number that we haven't optimized. We've just kind of chosen it from our asset plan. Would you recommend a better strategy or another way to maybe cut down on water but make sure the product's also safe?
Yeah, absolutely. I'd recommend it's called phenolphthalein. It's basically a caustic indicator. It's a really good way. It will basically, you just take your rinse water and it will turn pink in the presence of caustic and put a couple of drops in. That's kind of the ultimate way of knowing when caustic is out. It's actually more optimal than pH. And what I would do, we used to do it when the breweries I used to work in, we used to do it on every single CIP. So we'd basically be sat there at the bottom waiting for it to go clear, and then we'd pass it and move on. I appreciate that's a bit labor intensive, so what you can do is just do it 5 times, set the procedure for the amount of water that it takes to rinse out your caustic, and then of course just repeat that over the course of time. As I said before, burst rinsing is key over continuous rinsing especially, but yeah, I would say phenolphthalein definitely the optimum way. But pH is better than nothing, but yeah, and it's also really cheap. You can get it in titration kits from your chemical supplier, whoever they are, they'll all have phenolphthalein.
Just to add that to that as well, if you use that, that's the type of thing that if you have something like salsa ordered, they love it because it goes from white to pink. It's a bit of a go no go situation. So if you say this is how I test that I've rinsed it all away, they're really happy with that. They're like, yeah, tick, that's done. So.
Do you mind passing that back?
Hello. Regarding mashing going in, as you mentioned, you've basically got 2 approaches. You can either preheat your mash tun, or you can go for a higher strike temperature with a calibrated heat capacity of your mash tun. Do you have a feel for, or do you know, is there a difference in terms of what's better sustainably?
Yeah, I mean, I to be honest, I've always preheated first, just for the consistency side of it. The volume that you preheat with is key, so it's quite common just to, set 4 hex or 2 hex or 1 hex, or just set it for a while so you go down the stairs or something. You need to be really tight on when you do it, but I would say it's more optimal because you can heat less water up. So if you're aiming for a higher strike temperature, you have to heat all of that water up to the higher strike temperature. Whereas if you just rinse out if you heat up the mash tun, you're just using that volume of water. So I would say it's probably more efficient to do it that way, and it also helps with the consistency as well.
My sort of going back to the burst rinsing thing, what to do with sparging. So some places I've worked will have like a sparge on continually. You draw off and continue to sparge. Other places will be a batch sparge and burst, maybe 3 high volumes, you let that drain, and you draw off. What's your view on the best practice for efficiency of those 2 ways of sparging?
Yeah, again, to go back, it depends on your sort of system. So if you've got a separate mash lauter tun, you can really dry out that bed and then you can break it up with the rakes. So it's better to go basically batch. I think if you have an isothermal and just like a mash lauter tun combined, I'd say it's continuous is optimal. What I always try and do is just leave maybe a centimetre, try and get a centimetre of water to sit evenly over the top. And then you've got a nice even distribution. Because as I said, you're trying to prevent that channeling. And when you dry the bed out, it sucks it in, and then that's what's going to cause the channels to form in your bed, and you can't break that up in an isothermal. So for that, I would say it's kind of depending on your system. But yeah, continuous on isothermal, and then I'd say definitely batch on lauter tuns.
Thank you.
Also, when you're doing that, it's good to try and tweak it so that you're matching your sparge rate with your runoff rate, because then you don't put that pressure on that bed. Because you just want to make sure that you're not going to form any of those channels, because once you have, there's nothing you can do about it without raking it.
Any more?
Yeah.
All right, thank you so much, everyone. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.